Somewhere in your house, or in your mother's house, or in a box that came to you when somebody died, there is a photograph very like this one. A young man in a suit that does not quite fit him. Borrowed or bought for the day, and then not worn again until a funeral. A young woman beside him holding flowers she arranged herself that morning at the kitchen table. They are standing on a front step, because the front step is where you stood. Behind them, the terrace runs away downhill, and behind that, if whoever held the camera stepped back far enough, you can see the winding gear. He is 22. She is 20. He has been down the pit since he was 16, the same pit his father went down, and on the strength of that wage they have the keys to a house 4 streets away. The reception is in the welfare hall. It is the same hall where the union meets on a Tuesday night. The band that plays them in is the colliery band, and 2 of the men holding cornets were at school with him. Nobody in that photograph believes any of this is remarkable. This is simply the shape a life takes. You leave school, you go where the work is because the work is here. You meet a girl at the dance or through your brother on the same shift, and by 22 you are standing on a step in a suit that does not fit. In the year that photograph was taken, more people were married in England and Wales than in any year before it or any year since. And it has fallen every decade since, not gently. By the time those 2 are grandparents, the marriage rate in this country will be roughly a 1/5 of what it was on the morning they stood on that step, and the lowest ever recorded in a series that begins in 1862, when the state first started counting. But that is not the strange part, and it is not what this is about. Because the fall did not land evenly across the country. In one half of Britain, people carried on marrying more or less the way their parents had. In the other half, in the towns that had been built around the work, it came apart entirely. And 40 years later, 2 economists went back into those towns with the medical records of every child born in a single week, matched them against the record of every pit that ever operated in Britain, and found something in the bodies of the grandchildren that nobody had thought to look for. To understand any of it, you have to start with what that photograph actually stood on. Not the love, the wage, the hall, the band, and the pit. Take the wage first, because everything else is built on top of it. A man on the coalface in 1970 was not wealthy. He was, however, paid enough at 21 to put down a deposit, and he could see the next 20 years of his working life from where he stood. That second thing matters as much as the first. It is not a wage that lets a young man marry. It is a wage plus a horizon. He knows what he will be earning in 1975. He knows the pit is not going anywhere because the pit has been there since before his grandfather was born. He can walk into a building society and speak with the confidence of a man describing something he already owns. And around that wage, the town had built the rest of the machinery, mostly without meaning to. The colliery welfare hall was the center of it, and it is worth being precise about what a welfare hall actually was, because the phrase has faded out of the language. It was paid for out of the miners' own money, a levy on tonnage administered by a committee of men who worked underground. It held the branch meeting on a Tuesday. It held the pensioners' tea on a Wednesday. It held a wedding reception on a Saturday, and the same trestle tables came out for all 3. The billiard room, the reading room, the bar, the outdoor bowling green, places where a young man was in the same room as a young woman, week after week, with his brothers and his uncles watching, in a village where everybody already knew whose son he was. The band was part of it too. Grimethorpe's colliery band was formed in 1917 out of the wreckage of a band at Cudworth that had folded, paid for by the pit and by the welfare fund, and at certain periods the National Coal Board simply employed the players. A man could be on the books as a miner and spend most of his week on a euphonium. Whether that sounds like an indulgence depends entirely on what you think a village is for. Then there was the works outing and the wakes week, when the town closed and half of it went to the same stretch of coast in the same 7 days, and the courting that had begun in the welfare hall in February was carried on in a boarding house in Blackpool in July, in front of everybody, chaperoned by an entire community whether the couple wanted it or not. None of this was designed to produce marriages. All of it did. Marriage in a pit village was not a decision two people arrived at in isolation, and which the town then happened to permit. It was the ordinary output of a place organized from the wage upward, to introduce people to each other and then to give them somewhere to live. And here is the part that has to be said plainly, because the temptation to gild all of this is enormous, and it would be a lie. Not all of those marriages were good. Some of them were prisons. A woman who married at 20 in 1962 into a house 4 streets from her mother had, in practical terms, very little means of leaving, and the law offered her almost nothing. The Divorce Reform Act did not receive royal assent until 1969, and it did not come into force until the first day of 1971. Before that, ending a marriage meant proving that somebody had done something wrong. Plenty of women stayed because there was no door, and the work itself killed men. Speak to anybody who lived in one of those villages, and within about 4 minutes you will hear about lungs. A widow in Grimethorpe asked years afterwards whether she missed the pit, said her husband had suffered with his chest and had died at 69, and asked in return whether that was the life you would choose for your own children. She said she did not miss it. That woman is not nostalgic, and she is not wrong, and any account of this that cannot hold her sentence alongside the photograph is not worth listening to. So, not a golden age. It's a working age. A place where the money and the institutions happened to line up in such a way that getting married at 22 was the easiest thing in the world to do. If you were married in a welfare hall, or your mother was, I would like to know which hall and which year. Put it below, because most of that record does not exist anywhere else. And if it matters to you that somebody keeps it, subscribe. The archive is growing. Now here is where the obvious version of this story falls apart, and where it becomes considerably more unsettling than the obvious version ever was. The peak year for marriage in England and Wales is 1972. 84 marriages for every 1,000 unmarried men. 63.5 for every 1,000 unmarried women. It is the highest figure in the whole modern run of the data. And then it starts to fall. It is falling in 1975. It is falling in 1978. By 1980 it has dropped to 60 for every 1,000 unmarried men and 48 for every 1,000 unmarried women. And by 1986 it is down to 48 and 40. Read those dates carefully because they demolish the version of this story that most people carry around. The collapse in British marriage was already well underway before the Great Pit Closure Programme. It was underway before the strike. It was underway before the Nottinghamshire coalfield was set against the Yorkshire one, before Orgreave, before the announcement of 31 closures in a single afternoon. Britain had begun turning away from marriage while the pits were still working and the order books were still full. Why is not much of a mystery. Religion emptied out of it first. In 1900, around 85 in every 100 weddings in England and Wales were religious ceremonies. By the late 1970s, fewer than half were. By 2019, the figure was under 19 in 100. The divorce law changed and made the institution revocable, which changes what it means to enter it. Contraception arrived, women's earnings rose, and a wage of your own alters the arithmetic of whether to marry a man and when. Couples began living together first, and then simply living together. And the fall never stopped. By 2019, the rate was 18.5 per 1,000 unmarried men and 17 per 1,000 unmarried women, the lowest in a series running back to 1862. Just over 213,000 marriages that year between men and women, half the number in 1972, and the smallest annual figure since 1888. The most recent numbers are lower again. So the question is not why Britain stopped getting married. Britain decided that on its own, in every kind of town, for reasons that had nothing to do with coal. The question is why the same national retreat left one half of the country almost untouched and took the other half to pieces. Because that is what happened. And to see how, you have to watch what happens to a town when the thing at the center of it is switched off. Coal employed more than 700,000 people in Britain at the end of the 1950s. Within 10 years, that number had halved. The waves of closures kept coming through the 70s and the 80s, until, by the middle of the 90s, deep mining in this country had effectively ceased to exist. And it was not only coal. Manufacturing employment across the United Kingdom stood at 8.9 million in 1966. By 2016, it was 2.9 million. 6 million jobs gone out of the middle of the labour market over the working life of one man. Those are national figures, and national figures are anaesthetic. So come back down to one village. Grimethorpe sits about 7 miles out of Barnsley. On the 8th of October 1894, the directors of the Mitchell Colliery Company held a ceremony on an empty field, with 2 white circles painted on the ground to mark where the shafts would be sunk, and guests brought in by railway carriage along a branch line laid for the purpose. They were sinking into the Barnsley seam 6 feet of some of the best coal in England. The village grew afterwards around the pit, in the order that these places always grew: the shafts, then the houses, then the chapel, then the welfare, then the band. At its height, 44 in every 100 men in that village gave their occupation as miner. On the 13th of October 1992, the closure was announced. 4 days later, the Grimethorpe Colliery Band walked onto the stage at the Royal Albert Hall for the National Brass Band Championships, played a piece by Philip Wilby called The New Jerusalem, and won it with 99 points out of 100. 17 of the men holding instruments that afternoon were still on the colliery books and were about to be made redundant. That sequence of events is the reason the film exists. It is also, if you strip the film away, simply a description of what a colliery band was. The pit paid for it, the pit's men played in it, and when the pit went, the reason for the band's existence went with it, and the band had to be adopted by strangers to survive. The pit itself closed the following year. Counting Grimethorpe and the collieries around it, something in the order of 6,000 jobs went from that small corner of South Yorkshire between the middle of the 80s and the middle of the 90s. In 1994, unemployment in the village stood at around 1/3 of the working population, and Grimethorpe was named the poorest village in England. Between 1993 and 2001, nearly 2,000 people simply left. Now go back to the photograph and to that front step and think about what actually disappeared from that street. The wage went. Everybody knows the wage went. But look at what else was attached to the wage, because this is the part that gets missed in every account of deindustrialisation ever written. The welfare hall was funded out of the pit. The band was funded out of the pit. The outing was funded out of the pit. The pension scheme, the sick club, the trip to the seaside, the bowling green, the cricket team, the brass, the billiards, the room where the union met, and the room where your daughter had her reception. All of it hung off the same hook. When the hook came out of the wall, it did not only take away a man's means of paying a mortgage, it took away every institution in that village whose actual function, whatever it thought its function was, had been to put young people in a room together. The town lost its employer and its entire social machinery inside the same decade, and once the men were gone, the horizon went as well. That is the thing to hold on to. A young man in Grimethorpe in 1996 could still find work of a kind. What he could not find was any grounds on which to stand in front of somebody at the age of 21 and describe the next 20 years. Today, the ground where Houghton Main Colliery stood, between Grimethorpe and Great Houghton, holds a very large distribution warehouse. It has been an online fashion retailer's national fulfillment centre since around 2010, and a Prime Minister came to visit it in 2014 and praised the jobs it had brought. That is not a cheap point, and I am not going to make it a cheap one. Those are real jobs, and the alternative was no jobs. But the leader of Barnsley Council, himself a former colliery worker, has put it about as flatly as it can be put. The big employers the area needed have arrived, and the work they brought tends toward the minimum wage. What replaced the pit is not a smaller version of the pit. It is a completely different arrangement between a person and their working life, and it does not hand a 21-year-old a horizon. The broadest picture we have of those places was published in 2024 by researchers at Sheffield Hallam for the Coalfields Regeneration Trust. Across the former coalfields of Britain, there are now 57 employee jobs for every 100 residents of working age. The figure for the country as a whole is 73. In the main regional cities, it is 88. Around 600,000 coalfield residents, roughly 1 in every 6 adults of working age, are on out-of-work benefits. More than 1 in 10 are on disability benefits. Warehousing is now among the dominant forms of employment. The young have gone, and the population left behind is older and sicker than the national average. That is the wound. Now here is what the country was told to do about it. On the 15th of October 1981, at the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool, the Employment Secretary Norman Tebbit made a remark that has followed him for the rest of his life and beyond it. And because this channel tries to be fair to people, even when the record is against them, the first duty here is to correct the quotation, since almost everybody who repeats it gets it wrong. Tebbit didn't tell the unemployed of Britain to get on their bikes. He was responding to a young Conservative who had suggested that rioting was an understandable reaction to an economy with 3 million people out of work, and he answered it with a story about his own father, who had been unemployed in the 1930s. His father, he said, did not riot. He got on his bike and looked for work, and kept looking until he found some. That is what was said. It is a short anecdote about a particular man in a particular decade, and taken purely as a sentence, it is unremarkable. What made it live for 45 years is that the country understood exactly what it was being told. If the work is not where you are, the deficiency is not in the country's arrangements, it is in you. Move. That was not a stray remark. It was, in a real sense, the policy. The stated reason for declining to offer targeted support to the coalfields was that people could go where the jobs were. So, did they? Björn Bry and Valeria Rueda tested it, 40 years afterwards, and this is where the story turns from an argument into evidence. They took 2 of the great British birth cohort studies, which have followed every child born in Britain in a single week of 1958, and every child born in a single week of 1970, from birth all the way through life, recording their health, their homes, their incomes, and eventually their own children. Then they matched those children against records held by the Northern Mine Research Society, covering every coal mine that has ever operated in this country, so they could say, for each child, how heavily their county was hit by pit closures while they were growing up. And because old pits tended to be closed before new ones, the authors had a way of separating the effect of the closures from whatever else might have been true about those places. On migration, their finding is blunt. The pit closures did not trigger people to move. If anything, the probability of moving went down. The incentive to leave rose, and the resources to leave collapsed, and the second effect beat the first, which is a sentence that will surprise nobody who has ever tried to fund a deposit on a flat in another county out of a redundancy payment while a mortgage sits on a house nobody in the village wants to buy. And the people who did get out were not a random selection. They were disproportionately the children of better educated parents or of families with fewer roots in the place. That is the whole doctrine, tested and failed. Getting on your bike was available to precisely the households who needed it least. And there is one more finding on migration, which is the hinge into the last part of this. The ones who left carried some of it with them. The damage was reduced by leaving. It was not erased. Somebody watching this left and somebody watching this stayed, and both of those are the same story from different ends of it. If you are one of them, say which and say where. I read them. And if you have come this far, subscribe, because the rest of the record is not going to keep itself. Now the children. Bray and Rueda's central finding is about height, and I want to deliver it slowly because it does not need any assistance from me. Children who grew up in counties with a higher rate of pit closures relative to population grew up measurably shorter. Height is one of the oldest and most reliable proxies we have for the conditions of a childhood. Nutrition, illness, stress, warmth, the ordinary background weather of a house. The gap opens early, in the first years of life. There is some catching up in adolescence, as there usually is. But it does not close. In adulthood it is still there, and the authors put it at roughly 3 millimeters, 4% of a standard deviation, which sounds like nothing at all until you read the comparison they themselves draw. It is of the same order as the lower bound estimate of what the Irish famine did to the height of the people who survived it. Nobody starved in Grimethorpe. That is not what is being claimed, and it is not what the numbers say. What the numbers say is that a childhood spent in a place where the work had gone left a mark on the body of the same rough magnitude as the least dramatic estimate of a famine, and that the mark was still measurable when those children were 40. The rest follows the shape you would expect, and is worse in the detail. Body weight in those cohorts pulls toward the extremes at both ends, with the underweight effect stronger among the women and the overweight effect slightly stronger among the men. Worse general physical health in childhood, higher rates in adulthood of diabetes, of chronic back pain, of cancer. And worse mental health, with a markedly raised likelihood of periods of depression running right across the adult life course. Look at the childhoods themselves and you can see the mechanism. At age 10, the affected children were more likely to have a parent out of work, more likely to have a parent who had been off sick for weeks at a time, more likely to be in a household on benefits, more likely to be receiving free school meals, and living in worse housing by almost every measure the study captures. That is not a mystery to be solved. That is a cold house and an anxious kitchen, and it lasted years. Then those children became adults, and the adults had children of their own. They are less likely to own their homes. They are more likely to be claiming benefits. Among the women, they earn less. And their children, the third generation now, arrive earlier, much earlier, teenage parenthood, at a significantly raised rate. And those babies are more likely to be born late and more likely to be born with a health condition. That is the knife, and it is worth saying exactly what it is. It is not a fact about the men who lost their jobs. It is a fact about their grandchildren's birth weights. Now, the finding that runs the other way, because leaving it out would be dishonest, and because anybody who has actually read the paper would spot the omission immediately. Exposure to pit closures in childhood is associated with better educational outcomes, significantly so for men. And there is a well-established reason for it. Mining and heavy manufacturing raised the opportunity cost of staying at school, because a 16-year-old could walk out of the gates on a Friday and into a wage on a Monday. Take that wage away and school becomes the rational choice. The pits closing pushed boys into classrooms. It did not save them. They are better educated and they are still poorer, still less likely to own a house, still shorter, still more likely to be depressed. The authors are open that they cannot fully account for this, and they list the possible channels: health itself, inheritance, or the lack of one, and what economists call assortative matching on the marriage market, which is a technical phrase describing something everyone in a small town already understands: who is available to marry and what they bring. And I have to be precise here, because precision is the whole reason to trust any of this. That study measures fertility timing. It measures when people had children and how those children fared. It does not report a measured marriage effect in the coalfields. Anybody telling you that the pit closures have been shown to have reduced marriage in those specific towns is going beyond the evidence, and I am not going to do it. What we do have is the national picture of who still marries in Britain, and the picture is stark. The Marriage Foundation, which is a campaigning organisation with a settled view about marriage and about the welfare system, has published figures showing that among parents of young children in the poorest fifth of households, only around a quarter are married, and that 2021 was the first year in which more babies in England and Wales were born to unmarried couples than to married ones. Those are their numbers, and I have attributed them deliberately, and I am giving you the description without their explanation, because the description is what I can stand behind. Britain did not stop getting married. Britain's better off half has carried on marrying at rates that would be recognizable to the couple on that step. What has happened over 50 years is that marriage has quietly migrated up the income scale and become one of the things that money now buys in a country where it used to be one of the things that everybody had. So go back to the photograph one last time. He is 22 and she is 20, and the pit is behind them, and neither of them has any idea that they are standing at the top of the graph. His pit had 30 years left in it, perhaps a little more. When it closed, he was in his 50s, which is the worst possible age to be told to get on your bike. Their son was in his 20s and was one of the 2,000 who left the village, or one of the many more who did not. Their grandchildren are on the record now, in a study neither of those two would ever have heard of, as being slightly shorter than they should have been, likelier to be ill, likelier to be treated for depression, likelier to have become parents at 17, and likelier to be renting. And the last thing the research tells us is that this is not a story with an ending in it. The scars pass down at least a generation. Leaving reduces them and does not remove them. Whatever eventually repairs those towns, it has not happened yet. Stand on that street now. The winding gear came down long ago. The welfare hall is a car park, or a community centre with a leaking roof, or nothing at all. Down the road, past the roundabout, there is a shed the length of 4 football pitches with a fenced car park and a shift change at 6. Close your eyes. It is a Saturday in 1972. The band is coming up the hill, and it is loud and slightly ragged because 2 of them have been in the club since noon. There are chairs out on the pavement. Somebody's mother is crying at a wedding of a man she has known since he was in a pram. Inside the hall, the tables have been pushed together, and the same tables will be pushed apart on Tuesday for the branch meeting, because there is only one hall and it does everything. He is 22, in a suit that does not fit. She is 20, holding flowers she cut herself. Nobody has told either of them that they are living through the highest that this country's marriage rate will ever go, and that everything supporting it will be taken out from under this street within their own lifetimes. Open your eyes. The hall is gone. The gear is gone. The horizon that let a young man speak with confidence about the next 20 years is gone, and it did not go because anybody stopped wanting to marry. It went because the wage went, and then the hall went, and then the band, and then the outing, and then the young, in that order, over about 15 years, while the people who decided it sat several hundred miles away and told them to move. If there is a photograph somewhere in your house of 2 people standing on a step, tell me the year of it and tell me the town. That is where the archive actually lives, in other people's drawers. Subscribe, and the record continues.